Brian Lear on WNYC. So here's a story you may not have heard with the war and the election and everything else going on. Last Wednesday, the man, President Trump, wants to run FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which Trump loves to hate. The guy he's nominated to run it, Cameron Hamilton, went before the Senate for his confirmation hearing. And here's a strange thing. This is the same guy Trump fired last year for refusing to go along with a plan to shut the agency down. Now, as some of you weekend listeners know and podcast listeners know, our very own Micah Loewinger, co-host of On the Media, is, as far as we know, the only reporter who sat down with this likely new FEMA head for an interview. The two spoke for Micah's series American Emergency, the movement to kill FEMA. And he's bringing that conversation and more to the green space tomorrow night. We have some clips of Cameron Hamilton to play right now. And Micah joins us now with a preview of how this series is concluding and tomorrow night's event. Hey, Micah.
Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me.
So for anyone who only thinks about FEMA on the worst day of their life, like when their house gets blown down by a hurricane, just really briefly, what does the agency actually do?
The agency helps states prepare and respond to natural disasters and big emergencies of all different kinds. It helps send lots of money really, really quickly to communities when they need it most.
Why does Trump hate FEMA?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question. We get into all the nitty and gritty of it in our podcast series, American Emergency, the movement to kill FEMA. One reason is that he became convinced by conspiracy theories about the agency, how it was supposedly biased against Trump supporters or has ulterior motives. And I think, frankly, on the campaign trail in 2024, he just found it politically expedient in the middle of this, tightly contested election with Kamala Harris. There's a couple big hurricanes, of course, in Western North Carolina and Florida, all up the Eastern coast. And so it was just convenient, I think, at the time to blame the Biden administration for failing disaster survivors. And he kind of just ran with that when he came into office last year. And during the Doge era that we've all lived through, wild stories used to justify cutting down government agencies was kind of like the MO.
For listeners who hear OTM ever in recent months, they're aware of the amazing reporting you've been doing in your series, American Emergency, the movement to kill FEMA. Now, for people who just are tuning in to the idea that you've been covering this for a long time, who is Cameron Hamilton? And I said a little bit of it in the intro, but why is this nomination by Trump such a strange turn?
Such a strange turn. One reason is that he was running FEMA at the beginning of the Trump administration. He came in January with very little emergency management experience. He's running this very important, 25,000 person disaster response and recovery and preparation agency. And he is put in this bizarre situation where just 3 days into the second term, Trump says, I think maybe we should get rid of FEMA altogether or change it a bunch. And so you have this inexperienced guy who's never worked at FEMA before having to lead it through this crisis. He goes head to head with Kristi Noem and Corey Lewandowski, who really make it their mission to try to gut FEMA, to paralyze the agency, to stop it from issuing grants and contracts, billions of dollars to counties and states. And Hamilton, although he's supportive of major significant reforms to the agency, he didn't think that getting rid of it altogether was a good idea. He's at one point polygraphed by Corey Lewandowski. Lewandowski accuses Hamilton of leaking a story to the press about abolishing FEMA. Hamilton denies that. But then last May, Hamilton went in front of a Senate subcommittee and said on the record in his testimony that he didn't believe abolishing FEMA was a good idea, and he was fired the next day. So when I spoke to Cameron Hamilton, in December. He had been out of office for a little while, but I didn't think the public had like a really good sense of like the chaos and the damage that had been done to this agency. That's why I wanted to talk to him. But I had no way of predicting that like 5 months later, he would be nominated to run the agency again, now in an official capacity. And so it was wild to watch the Senate confirmation hearing last week through that lens of like, wow, is this guy really about to make this comeback after all that?
Yeah. So we're going to play two clips from your series of Cameron Hamilton. This is one in which he's making his case to Kristi Noem, who was then the head of Homeland Security, about why he's qualified to run FEMA.
I worked in emergency management more specifically at my time at the State Department. So while the traditional model of emergency management is domestically focused, all my experience was overseas, dealing with mass evacuation planning, dealing with biocontainment for Ebola, you name it. I did not pretend or presume by any means to be the most qualified individual, but my arguments to her were simply, I would love to be an asset for you, to have an ally within the agency, but also still give the president time to make his determination.
All right, so that's Cameron Hamilton talking to Micah about how he presented his qualifications originally. And then, and here's yet another bizarre twist, he's nominated for the position to the surprise of everybody, as you've been describing. His interview with you had already been recorded, and then he calls your office. And then here's a little bit of that as he's speaking to your staffer, Eloise.
Hi, Eloise. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, Cam. I'm here with Micah, who you spoke to before.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you. I wanted to call and reach out because I understand that you are getting ready to air our previous conversation, and I wanted to speak with you about that if you have some time.
All right. Pick up the plot, Micah.
That's right. So just to refresh the timeline a little bit, I spoke to Cameron Hamilton for our 4-part series in December. So he was out of office. And then in the meantime, we're writing, we're producing, we're putting together this larger series, which finished airing last month. And, during that time, he is now nominated to run the agency again. And it occurs to him, well, this very candid interview I gave about my time at FEMA last year is about to come out. And he told me he was nervous that our interview would undermine his Senate confirmation hearing. He was worried it would draw negative attention. He was quite candid. He was talking quite a bit about the chaos that Kristi Noem and Corey Lewandowski, and frankly, the Trump administration put him and the agency through. And here he is, a now future potential representative of the Trump administration. I can see where he's coming from. But I'm a journalist. So if a public official who is trying out for a very, very big job running a very important agency calls me and asks me to delay the release of an important interview at a moment when it really matters that people have information to this guy, his resume, his worldview, I'm not going to go along with that. So I told him that it was an inappropriate request and that I would not, delay the release of the episode to help his Senate confirmation hearing. And we put it out as planned.
If you had agreed to his request to delay the interview so it would be easier for him to get confirmed, then you would have had to cover yourself on the media and investigate yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, that would have been a ethical disaster for us as a news program, and a doubly ethical disaster for a news program that is devoted to the exploration of good and bad journalism. I mean, I'm not really sure he completely thought it through the request when he called me, but I will say that watching a Senate confirmation hearing, I felt like he kind of got let off pretty easy by lawmakers. There were a lot of hard questions they could have asked him, and they really didn't. So perhaps his fears about this interview undermining his prospects were ultimately unfounded.
So complete the timeline for our listeners. Did the interview run before the Senate confirmation hearing, and did he get confirmed?
It did run before the Senate confirmation hearing, and he sat for questions last week, but to my knowledge, there's been no confirmation vote. All signs kind of point to this guy is going to get the job because FEMA has been leaderless. It has not had a permanent leader for the past 15 months. And I think regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, if you're a member of Congress, it's really important to you and your constituents as we go into disaster season, hurricane season, wildfire season, that FEMA has a competent leader or even has a leader at all. And even though I think it's important to scrutinize whoever's in this position, Cameron Hamilton, if confirmed, would be the least qualified leader since Hurricane Katrina era Michael Brown. So even though I think it's worth the public paying attention to that, the other side of the coin is that if FEMA continues to be leaderless, chaotic, falling apart, losing staff members left and right, that's really bad too. So ultimately, and based on what my sources are saying, they believe this guy's going to get the job, and we'll just have to kind of wait and see how he plans to run the agency.
You know, it's been fascinating for me to watch recent FEMA developments in the news while listening to your series and after having listened to your series. And you came on this show early on in the series to set up, you know, what you were presenting, your deep dive into FEMA. And I kept thinking, man, I wonder how much reorientation of this series in progress Micah is having to do. Was there a lot?
There was a lot, you know, and that's part of the fun and of making of doing, you know, long form journalism is that you go into a story with an understanding of what might happen, your own sort of theories and hypotheses, and then as you do reporting, you have to adjust. That's just honest. That's just honest journalism. For one, you know, there was, when we were working on this series, there was talk of the Trump administration cutting the agency by as much as 50%, which would have a remarkable effect on our country's ability to respond to earthquakes, wildfires, hurricanes, and the like. You know, as we know, because of climate change, disasters are growing more costly, harder to predict. So arguably, we need a robust federal response to emergencies now more than ever.
Right. And maybe that's sort of the takeaway as we start to move toward the end of our time, Micah. You know, when you launched the series to the movement to kill FEMA, I think it was still in the air a little bit that Trump might actually want to put this agency out of business. And then there were these developments, including the nomination of Cameron Hamilton, that made it seem like, oh, well, Trump isn't really going to put FEMA off the face of the map, but we still need to take away the fact that they still want to make deep cuts in the agency, that one of Hamilton's positions as Trump's is that this should be less a federal responsibility and more on the states.
That's right.
Even though it's, you know, very expensive for a state, especially think about a small state that gets like a lot of hurricane damage or blizzard damage. New York had, you know, a big blizzard earlier this year that, as I understand it, they're still waiting for FEMA to
That's right.
hand over the money that they're supposed to hand over to help with recovery that's still going on from damage from that. So what's still on the table is really transforming FEMA from a overwhelmingly federal responsibility to a state one.
States already play a really big role in responding to disasters, but FEMA has historically sent a lot of money to states after big disasters. And FEMA under Trump has been talking more and more about shifting the burden back to states, having them pay more for disasters, but also there's talk of FEMA responding to fewer disasters in general. And I do really think we're going to see the burden fall more to state level taxpayers as a result.
But
and
it also means, I'm sorry to jump in, and you can obviously finish, but I think that also means ultimately it falls more to the individual who's not going to be covered by the government at all.
After many disasters, individuals are still able to apply for individual assistance if they qualify. I am not certain that we will see that in jeopardy, but what FEMA does is it's almost invisible, and that's part of the problem with it. FEMA, after federally declared disaster, is there to help remove debris, to help repair parks and public schools and bridges. That's where the FEMA money goes. It goes towards making the things in our life that make our lives work. And I'm not sure we're totally prepared to see that paradigm shift. The fact is that the towns, states, and counties rely on this money to make our lives work after and during disasters. And if this paradigm shift occurs, it could really shake things up.
So just tell people what to expect tomorrow night at your WNYC event in the green space. And is it sold out? Can people still come? Can they stream it? Tell us about the green space event.
There are still tickets. You can check it out by going to wnyc.org/events. It's called On the Media Presents American Emergency, the Movement to Kill FEMA. There's really two things you're going to get from the experience. A deep dive into the fascinating and bizarre history of FEMA. You'll hear from me and my collaborator, senior producer Eloise Blondio. And then we'll also hear from Marianne Tierney, who is a longtime FEMA staffer who I think is really emblematic of the devoted public servants that make FEMA work. She worked at the agency for 10 years, and then she was put in the bizarre position of working with Cameron Hamilton to write a memo outlining how they might abolish FEMA. She ended up resigning shortly after that experience, but she's going to give us a deeper look into the chaos that has been unfolding at FEMA over the past year.
Micah Loewinger, co-host of On the Media, on stage with those people he was just describing tomorrow night at 7 o'clock at the Green Space. You want to go back and listen to his series, you can always do that. American Emergency, the Movement to Kill FEMA. Amazing work, Micah. You should win multiple awards for this. Thank you for coming on again.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.